Coding for Gogo began when she sculpted grand dreams onto pottery, crocheted algorithmic patterns onto garments that we grew into. This was the original digital technology, a reflection of our artistic expression. In a world as big as one's imagination, made smaller by tech, we're brought together by clouds and streams. For even networks know the strength of connectivity, as we do the power of human connection. Africans, our imagination ruled the world. By it, worlds advanced. New methods demand new forms, so we morphed. From mud huts to skyscrapers, from Morse code to binary code, where coding for girls is not sacrilegious, but said with the same simplicity as a makeup tutorial. Yes, a tomorrow where girls are lining coding like lining makeup, hacking bro codes, breaking barriers. Background has never birthed intelligence and talent, nor be they the DNA of privilege. If you can dream it, you can code it. Debug and refactor with every binary, not restricted by a mouse, keyboard, or data. Be it in a leafy suburb, downtown CBD, or the township. Creativity your currency, your mind a mine. With evolution, the tune never changes. We just dance to it differently. Memory is stored in feeling. This flow is innate. There is no mathematics to the sound. But we have always known this. Rhythm is more in action than in thought, and it's playing out than it's scripting. Some have called it mysticism. I call it the resurrection of our ancestors who art in heaven through our images of unborn things, our words, sensations, song and dance, an embrace of Urban Festival 2020, an embodiment of the ideal.
Wow. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to officially welcome you all to our Imbizo, the Urban Economies Table Talk. My name is Nomfundo Faith Lamini, and I am the Program Manager for Productive Cities at the South African Cities Network. I'd like to warmly welcome all of you to our much anticipated Imbizo, which is the first of many city-specific engagements we plan to have in the future. I'd just like to please inform everyone to feel free to post any questions on the chat or raise your hand should you wish to engage directly in any of the question and answer sessions as we're going to proceed with today's very, very exciting dialogue. So maybe just for us to firstly start off our session, I wanted to provide some context regarding the development of the research work we have undertaken as the South African Cities Network pertaining to our Urban Economies research agenda. So basically, the Urban Economies research agenda is aimed at looking at how we can improve local conditions for diverse enterprise development and growth, and was premised on the following key particular principles. The first is that we were aiming to achieve an understanding of how to grow our urban economies. And by this, we would look at research initiatives that would pertain information that regards the improvement of our local conditions for diverse enterprise development and growth, leveraging spatial transformation for inclusive economic growth, ensuring inclusive economic infrastructure and services, building innovation-driven economies, and understanding our regional economies, such as our city regions and our urban-rural interfaces. We also went on to look on how it is that we can expand economic participation and inclusion. And this is ineffective to public employment programs such as PEPs and the well-known EPWP program, how it is that we can gain a differentiated understanding of economies and economic strategies to enable inclusion. This is in particular to our informal economies, our township economies, our secondary cities, coastal cities, and again, the urban-rural linkages. And then also consider future economic prospects. And then thirdly, we wanted to investigate on how to improve local economic governance. And this is to clarify and strengthen our municipal economic development role and capacities, and then further strengthen economic development arrangements and partnerships, especially between public as well as public-private partnerships. And then lastly, one of the things that we thought is quite integral in terms of kind of tying in everything is how it is that we can actually deepen our economic intelligence in this particular regard. And this would look at how it is that we can examine the strengthening of systems for economic monitoring, evaluation, reporting, learning, and analytics. And so this, colleagues, gives us a bit of an overall synopsis of the types of insights we're interested in as a South African Cities Network in establishing in order for us to improve city economic governance and strengthen the economic role and performance of our cities as the primary drivers of production. And having understood now the overall scene setting pertaining to our elements of research work, this also ushers us into a very exciting first segment in which we'll be listening to a quick discussion between esteemed Professor Ivan Turok and our CEO, Mr. Sithole Mbanga. So Sithole, I'd like to just hand over to you. If you can please just introduce our first panelist member, Professor Ivan Turok, and then lead us through to the discussion and discourse. Thank you.
I hope you can hear me. Nomfundo, can you just confirm?
Yes, I can.
And yeah, and greetings to everybody that's online and welcome to this session. I'm going to introduce Professor Ivan Turok in exactly the way that you have debriefed me, Nomfundo, on paper. Safe to say that I've worked with Professor Turok when at some point he was the lead author of the third edition of the State of South African Cities report. So I'm going to disrespect some protocols, Ivan, for a while and just call you Ivan. How are you doing?
I'm great, thanks, Sithole. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again. So thanks very much for joining us. So colleagues, currently Professor Turok is the chair at the University of the Free State and a fellow at the HSRC. And he is the chair that's looking at urban economies, which is a chair that between the South African Cities Network as well as the Human Science Research Council and the National Research Foundation is co-founded. So it's a partnership between those three institutions that's looking at urban economies. And I would like to welcome Professor Turok to the session. And just as a way of welcoming Professor Turok, Professor, I seem to recall just in the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks or so, there was an article that was published in which you were making comments about the disparities that exist between South African cities, in other words, their geography, their jurisdictional geography, and the regions within which they are located. So for instance, you will be talking about the Gauteng city region in relation to the city of Johannesburg, or if you are in Cape Town, we will be talking about the city of Cape Town in relation to the broader Cape Town functional region, which includes Stellenbosch, which fall outside of the geography of the jurisdictional geography of the city. Do you just want to just briefly take us through about that article and summarize exactly what were you indicating that we need to take care of when it comes to spatial inequalities? I think you also made reference to how it is that COVID has actually amplified the inequalities that exist between regions and the cities within which the regions fall.
Yes, thanks very much, Sithole, for that. And it's nice to be part of this panel. This was based on the NIDS-CRAM survey, which has been a widely publicized evidence base. Actually, it's the first data that has been made available to analyze the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19, the pandemic, on our society and our economy. And there have now been 2 waves. It's a panel survey of about 7,000 people, a repeat survey of the same group to identify how many have lost jobs, how many have gone hungry, how many have run out of money to buy food, how many have struggled to send their children to school, and so on. So it's a very important survey, and we participated in the second wave to analyze particularly the spatial impact. And we used two basic settlement types or classifications to try and understand the geography of this crisis. The first one was based on the city-rural. We distinguished between metros, smaller cities, and rural areas. So it was in effect cities and their hinterlands, as you said at the introduction. And then we looked within the cities. We compared 4 settlement types: suburbs, townships, informal settlements, and peri-urban areas. These are often the traditional tribal land at the edge on the periphery of the city. And we found that cities seem to have done better. Metros seem to have done better than rural areas, which was quite surprising because metros have more jobs in a way. And therefore you might expect the impact to have been bigger on cities because of more employment. But in fact, it's rural areas that have lost out the most from the pandemic. The cities have been relatively resilient. Of course, everywhere has suffered. So that was the first key point. The second key point, when we look within the cities, it was our informal settlements that suffered the most. Most affected by the lockdown and the prevention of informal trading, for example. The suburbs, again, have been least affected, also significantly affected, but not to the same extent as townships and informal settlements, where issues like hunger, quite stark findings really on the increase in hunger, and numbers of people saying they ran out of money to buy food. And there's this is quite a severe issue, of course, facing the country now, but demonstrating really that we're not all the same, living in the same kinds of places. Some places it's easier to work at home, it's easier to self-isolate. Other places much more vulnerable to the lockdown, much more precarious, the kinds of jobs people have. I think that was a key message. In our townships and informal settlements, many more people lost their jobs, which is, as I say, very, very worrying.
That's quite interesting. So essentially, I think what that tells us is that if you were in the lower strata of equality and prior COVID and COVID hit, you are actually worse off now. And I suspect that's one side of the story. But I also imagine that the other side of the story is that if you were in the higher part of that hierarchy, you would have survived, despite the fact that all of us have been negatively impacted upon by COVID. Which then, if you to put that context into a municipal space, it implies that the cities have survived much better, relatively speaking, than your rural municipalities. That's something that's very interesting. I would at some point implore on you to indicate where we could find this information. And maybe there's a link so that we can read with much more depth about what it really is telling us, and perhaps an opportunity to comment. So is this a subject matter of your objectives as you assume the role of the chair on urban economies in partnership with the South African Cities Network?
Yes, very much so. Just to qualify something that you said, Sithole, before I answer your question, babe, when you said they're much better, that's an exaggeration. Okay, so the cities are not much better off. Everywhere has been badly affected, including the cities, but the rural areas have been worse affected. All right, so the differences are quite small in the context of the overall scale of the decline that everywhere has faced. Cities are marginally better off, and they are now showing more signs of recovery than the rural areas. That's the key distinction. They seem to be more resilient, using that word that we used, if you remember, in the State of the Cities report 9 years ago. Cities are showing greater signs of resilience. And actually the biggest sign of resilience affects these kind of better off workers. In other words, there were more people, rather than losing their job, they became furloughed. In other words, they were put on sort of unpaid leave, all right? Since the level 3 lockdown, more of these workers have been brought back onto the payroll of their companies because some of the companies have reopened again, all right? So in other places outside the suburbs, people have lost their jobs completely. It wasn't just a temporary layoff, all right? So that's a key distinction.
Yeah.
But so this issue is very important, the issue of resilient economies. The key purpose, I think, of the chair is to try and understand the economic structure and the economic functioning of our cities much better. In South Africa, we just sort of treat cities as a black box, actually. We have our big metros, big diversified economies. We assume they're pretty strong, but we don't try to disaggregate into those economies. We don't distinguish much, for example, between the export base or the tradable sector in the city's economy, which is the key driver of growth, the sector which is going to export or which is protecting the city from foreign imports, right? That's the key, the tradable sector, not the other sector, which is serving local consumers, hairdressers, branches of banks, public services. Most public services are non-tradable, right? So we're really interested in the heart of the city's economy, the manufacturing sector, the tradable services like tourism, like call centers, these kinds of activities, which will make the difference to the recovery of cities in the period ahead, whether we can get these sectors back functioning effectively. Logistics and transport would be another one. These are really important for the long-term growth and prosperity of our cities. So actually in the paper that, that this webinar is partly launching, we try to, for the first time, use existing government data to try and understand better, get a preliminary insight into the economic structure of the cities. And we compare Johannesburg, Cape Town, Durban, Pretoria, Ekurhuleni, to compare their distinctive economic specializations. What are they relatively strong in? Which sectors and which occupations or functions are they relatively strong in that are, provide a basis for building on for the future? We don't want all the policy support to focus on hairdressers. We must focus on these key export industries. That's what we're really trying to say.
And I suspect if you have that sharp knowledge at such a granular level, then that empowers city governments to be able to negotiate deals with the private sector, or alternatively negotiate with their counterparts in the provincial government and in the national government, particularly departments that are responsible for driving the economy, like trade and industry, like agriculture. And in that way, they become much more empowered to enter into the type of negotiations that deliver deals for the city, because cities are really looking for a new deal. And I think all of us are found wanting about what should this new deal sort of look like? And I mean, that's quite an interesting thing to do. Tell you what, and I'm not putting you on the spot, but I would like to invite you to a discussion sometime next week. So Thursday and Friday, the city of Johannesburg will be hosting a preliminary discussion, which they want to think about where Johannesburg should be in the next 2 years. And because they can't think outwardly beyond 2 years. I mean, the disruption that has been caused. I know a colleague of mine who says, under the current circumstances, if you think you can think about scenarios, which is the methodology that was used previously, you might just be out of touch with the reality, because the disruptions are likely to be more frequent. Colleagues, those of us that are listening on the chat room, Dr. Fesachi has given us the link, and one of the questions, well, it's not a question, but it's a comment that comes from one of the observers of this conversation is, could the panelists address their short and medium-term recommendations? These are not recommendations, they are at the moment statements. And I think, yes, listener and participants, we will get to that. We've noted your questions. And when we get to the panel, I would like the panelists to please address themselves to that particular question. So Professor Chirok, thanks very much for taking us through those particular questions. I'm gonna ask you the very last question as part and parcel of the introductory. It relates to the fact that whereas COVID, or the disruption, let's call it the disrupted environment, came unannounced and none of us were ready for it. And it has had a generally negative impact on all of us. What do you think, from your point of view, what do you think are the opportunities for South Africa? I mean, we have a huge spatial transformation agenda that we want to achieve, which spatial transformation agenda ought to lead to some levels of equity amongst societies and communities that otherwise were divided economically, politically, in terms of access and all of those things. What are the immediate things that, as a consequence of the disruption, do you think we can exploit? And I don't want to use the word low-hanging fruits, because I think that's a bit overused, but I think something tells me that we ought to be able to exploit the disruption to the advantage of the majority of South Africans so that we can be able to achieve equity.
Yes, well, I think 2 points, Sithole. That's a big question. Two points I'd like to make in that respect. I think the first one relates to this notion of localization, which has now become quite a prominent feature of the recovery, economic transformation recovery plan. I think there are some pretty obvious areas in which we need to put more emphasis on local production rather than importing. And I think the PPE scandal has exposed that. We imported on a mass scale masks and sanitizer from China and other places, right? That shouldn't have happened, and that shouldn't be necessary. There are simple manufactured products that we should definitely be producing ourselves. We can compete. These things are bulky. These things are costly to transport. We should be making more relatively straightforward products ourselves, and we should have a concerted effort to do that, right? The second thing I think that is an opportunity is, of course, the regional trade agreement and our links with the rest of the continent. We need to work harder to build these markets, to strengthen collaboration with African countries, to provide some of the services. And actually this relates to your interest and our interest in cities, in city building. We know that African urbanization is happening. It's the most rapidly urbanizing continent in the world. Cities are emerging, whether we like it or not. We can play a very useful role in planning, designing, and managing these cities, indeed in investing in the infrastructure as well, to build more functional cities across the continent. It's an example of the kind of trade that we could develop from South Africa, building relationships with other African countries, providing expertise, developing markets, and creating a more prosperous continent. Everything from community-based planning and informal settlement upgrading. We've got expertise in all of these areas, actually. We need to marshal that expertise. We need to tell government, COGTA and other government departments, let's take advantage of our expertise, not just for commercial reasons, but also for good solidarity reasons with other African countries. And let's build more functional cities that are connected to each other with good transport connections, electronic, digital connectivity, in order to create a more prosperous continent for the future. I think that would be a fantastic vision. And I think national government would be receptive to that at this point in time, when the continent is really struggling from the impact of the crisis.
Well, there's a comment on the chat room, and I'm inviting everybody to comment with the last 2 minutes that I have in introducing Professor Chirok. So someone says, yes, I agree with Professor Chirok. We need localization and we need intra-Africa collaboration. In other words, us collaborating with Africa. But the previous question says, well, that's all said and done, both in law and in policies, and it's not happening. right? So we can tell COGTA, as you say, we can tell trade and industry, we can tell all the other national departments these things, and then they can commit to them through policy and in law, and nothing happens.
Well, let's
so where is our Achilles heel on this issue? And I think our body politic has been talking about good plans, good policies, but lack of implementation. And that's possibly, if there's no other comment or question that's going to come from the chat room, that will possibly be my last question for you, Nomfundo, to take over now that we've done the introduction.
Shall I quickly comment on that?
What do we need to do?
Yeah, what do we need to do?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good one for the panel. Let me also just try and say one or two little things about that. I think we need to make the case more clearly, I think is the first thing. Justin and I have been looking at the free trade agreement. We've been looking at what government does to promote South African exports to Africa. We've been talking actually to a number of these service providers, from architects to designers to planners to finance experts to logistics companies. We've been talking about the extent to which government supports them in terms of trade. And they say there isn't a coherent vision for how South Africa sees this trading relationship. There's a sort of sectoral emphasis, but there's no coherent urban vision as the way I've been trying to articulate it. We don't sell urban services. We don't package them in that way. And the companies don't collaborate much. So we need to knock heads together. We need to persuade our Deputy Minister, Parks Tau. I think he would be passionate about this, given his expertise as the previous mayor, his role in these UN United Nations. I think we might be able to persuade him, if we had your support, Sithole, and the resources of the city's network, to make the case for our urban agenda to become an African urban agenda, and for South Africa to collaborate with other African countries in building services and relationships with other countries around urbanization and coherent urban development. I think that's quite a nice, strong vision, and I hope he will be receptive to that. Open doors in the rest of government. Yeah.
Let's hope that we will be able to harvest more from the panel discussion around this question. And I think, to the panelists, as I step off the platform, to the panelists, I think the key issue that has been raised, particularly Ashraf says, yes, those are macro issues. What about the city practitioner on the ground? You know, that practitioner that's in the economic development department in city XYZ or ABC, the relationships that are interlocking all these good policy intentions, but just don't get to happen. But Ivan, or Professor Turok, thanks very, very much, and keep it up. Keep doing the work. And I think the relationship we are striking between yourself and the University of the Free State, and in your capacity as the chair, is quite interesting. We look forward to working with you for the next couple of years on exactly the same thing. And I suspect the underlying issue here is, as long as it's going to be focused on the praxis, that difference between the theory and the practice, because it seems that's where it matters most. But thanks very, very much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Nomfundo, can I please hand over to you at this point in time? And I'm gonna go off screen, but keep watching. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sithole. Thank you very much, Professor Ivan Turok, as well. That was quite an interesting discussion. I think there's so much that we need to also unpack pertaining to that particular domain. Lots of learnings, especially pertaining to local production instead of importing, and how it is that we can actually foster the case so that the impact and the interventions are actually tangibly seen. It also highlights just how complex the various systems and localities of government are, and decision making. I wonder how it is that we can go about simplifying and also delineating the particular roles and responsibilities of the various spheres and sectors, and also foster in that intergovernmental relations. I saw from the comments on the chat that it was a necessity to also kind of delineate how, and maybe, just maybe, for us to not just have views and policies and perspectives, but also possibly legislate for things to be done in a particular order, in order for us to be able to see these actual tangible impacts. But that being said and done, I think it ushers us straight into the next very interactive session that we'll be having with our panelist members. But before we just get there, I wanted to ensure that everybody who's on this call is also able to kind of participate in a way of sorts. And so we're going to launch a quick temperature or room setting or synopsis, just to ask the viewers a quick question pertaining to a tool that we'll use called Mentimeter. So I'm just going to ask my team to please assist me with the link. And you'll find the link underneath the chat button. Then here you go. You basically can click on the link, which is www.menti.com, as is shown in the chat. And then if it asks you for a password, you utilize 3355290. So you can literally utilize this from your cell phone or from even your laptop if you're utilizing that particular device. So it should send you to a screen that is asking you to please enter the particular code. And the code is 3355290. And then basically the question that we're asking you to please respond to is that in one word, please describe your experience or view of the urban. Some very interesting observations coming through. So we've got 3 of our current members currently on. So the kind of words and descriptions that are coming through are complex and chaotic. We've got poor integrated planning. Our colleagues feel that it's quite slow. Sure, we've got splintered as well as divisive. We've got jargon, quite lazy, undefined. And I think this kind of gives us a bit of a synopsis, quite strangely, to our particular experiences of the urban. There's inequality also coming through. And it's the key to our development also coming through. There's polluted, it's lively, there's vibrancy, there's buzz. And so it's quite a dichotomy of experiences that we are seeing coming through from our various participants. And I think we can keep interacting on that particular form, but it also is going to be quite interesting to denotate, especially some of these sentiments in terms of what it is that is being noted. But it also ushers us in quite interestingly into our next very, very interactive section, which now is going to be the exciting component with our additional panelists, who are also paper authors for our Urban Economies paper series. And so our first contribution is from Dr. Justin Fusachi, who co-authored his paper with Professor Ivan Turok. And Dr. Justin Fusachi is a senior research specialist at the Human Science Research Council, with a focus on urban economies, development economics, and applied microeconomic research. He was previously Director of Economic Planning, Policy and Research in the Department of Economic Development, Environmental Affairs and Tourism in the Eastern Cape. And he completed his PhD at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, where he won the prestigious Founders Medal for the Economic Society of South Africa for his thesis on the development of the middle class in South Africa. So Dr. Visagie has expertise in microeconomic data analysis and has worked on a wide array of cross-sectional and longitudinal household data sets. His recent research projects cover issues of regional economic development, city-region economies, tradable services, spatial inequality and inclusion, social mobility, urbanization, housing, and migration. And thank you so much, Dr. Visagie, for having joined us today, and more especially for also having contributed to our Strengthening Urban Economies paper series. So the paper that you wrote is titled The Economic Landscape of South African Cities, and it looks at diversity across space, sector, and skills. Welcome, and can you please maybe just tell us and our particular audience today just briefly about what the paper aimed to explore?
Hi everyone, thanks Namfundo. Nice to be on the panel today. Yes, so what this paper does, and we've already been chatting with Ivan, so you've got a flavor for it, is that too often we get given statistics about the South African economy, and it's an aggregated statistic. So I'll give you one concrete example. We often hear about unemployment in South Africa of around 30%. But the reality is that not everybody faces a 30% rate of unemployment, right? If you're a skilled professional with expertise, in fact, your unemployment rate would be as low as any other OECD country. So different groups experience very different dynamics in South Africa, and that shouldn't come as a surprise, right? We're one of the most unevenly developed countries in the world. And the way in which this plays itself out is not just by particular groups, but in space. So different communities invariably face very different conditions. And this comes through no matter how you slice and dice it. So whether you're interested in a sort of rural or urban dynamics, you'll see differences taking place. But if you just drive through any South African city, you can see wildly different dynamics going on, whether you're driving through Sandton or you go out towards some of the townships on the peripheries. So essentially what this paper does is tries to make the case that we need to understand more about what's happening in our economy at a local level, with a focus on the different metros. And so it's a preliminary analysis, and it is admittedly it's fairly high level, but I think it's a good starting point for policymakers and concerned citizens out there to start thinking more intentionally and targetedly about what our economic landscape actually looks like, because the key to national development will be getting every area maximizing its potential. And that means that different places need to do different things. So a focus on industrialization might enhance what's happening in Ekurhuleni or Nelson Mandela Bay, but it would probably not do so much for Johannesburg or for Cape Town. Okay, so beneficiation around the mining industry might help certain rural communities and some urban areas, but it's obviously going to do little for the Eastern Cape. And so the key to our development is actually understanding what's happening at a local level. And so the paper at a sort of high level looks at three different dynamics. The one is in terms of industries. And so we dig down into Stats SA data using the quarterly labor force survey to try and get a more fine-grained understanding of which sectors have been growing, which haven't, and what the basic profile of each of the metros looks like. And so that's in terms of industry. But we also look at occupation, and that's because it's, there's a growing trend towards understanding cities, not just in terms of what workers make, in other words, the industry, but what they do, their skill set. Because you see that in terms of global value chains, actually, you can be working in clothing and textiles, but actually being in the advertising or the design component of that. And so it's the skill set of the workers is certainly a key to what the productive capability of a region. In fact, a famous economist, Ed Glacier, would go as far as to say, actually, if you just get high skills in your city, you'll get growing cities. So I think, it's about the industries, but it's also about what skills we have in our cities. And so we dig down into that. And then the third aspect to be aware of is this, I suppose, the institutional environment. So the infrastructure, like localized effects, place-based advantages, and that really differs from place to place, whether we're talking about, as I said, infrastructure or institutions, or the capability of local government, or even the geography. Durban is where it is as a port on the coast, and that's a natural advantage. So I'm already talking too much, so let me stop and hand back to you, Nomfundo.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Justin, for that. I think it's quite important that these type of insights are actually brought forth, because a lot of the time I don't think that when cities are planning, especially for their futures, that they consider the industrial mixes, they consider the distinctiveness of the particular culture and ethos of what that city holds. And so I think it's quite important for us to also denotate that in a particular way, and then also see where it is that similarities can be drawn, so that cities with a similar context and spatial framing can also learn from each other and develop, for example, like regional development, collaboration and partnership and learning, and possibly also even go beyond, for example, an element of just planning and developing pertaining to the municipal boundaries. And I think that's quite interesting and quite insightful, especially for city leadership and the practitioners to also see. And maybe if I can just kind of pick your brain a bit more as you were speaking, what would you say are the main learnings or takeaways that decision makers, just quickly as a synopsis, decision makers or lead practitioners should be able to grasp, especially from this element of research?
Yeah, that's a great question. What are the main take-homes? Look, I think the first thing would be that our industrial policy needs to be smarter about what's happening at a local level. So, a place-blind industrial policy is going to, inadvertently amplify our spatial inequalities. So, if we treat all places the same, we can't expect that the divisions between them are going to narrow. And invariably, what you can happen is sort of it all becomes about a winner-takes-all sort of scenario. And so I think industrial policy needs to be smarter about understanding what the competitive advantage are between the different places and how to enhance them, so that rather than just competing, it's about complementing one another. And we just, our understanding of those dynamics is so limited, and we need to better understand the flows between our different cities and city regions. So that would be my first comment about industrial policy. I think a second would be related to that is having a better understanding of the demand and supply of skills for each of the local labor markets. So, what's needed in Nelson Mandela Bay is different to what's needed in eThekwini in Johannesburg. And are the universities providing the right types of skills for each of these industries? And it really is about us trying to better support bottom-up processes, not just a sort of top-down approach. So, productive economies, productive nations, productive cities, it's not through the government coming from the top down and saying, this is the way it's going to be. It's actually about communities and different private sector, different stakeholders, NGOs, NPOs, all coming from the bottom up, understanding their regions, understanding their economies, their dynamics, and planning together. And so certainly from a skills perspective, that's also missing in the current dialogue around South Africa is actually what is the occupational profile of each of the cities, and how can that be better tailor-made to plan around that. Our research actually shows puts out a red flag, because we see that because of deindustrialization, there's a lot of blue-collar jobs that are falling away out of the market. And in terms of white-collar jobs, we see it was actually driven by more generic skills, not specialized skills in technical hard skills. So we might find that in South Africa, we're actually facing something of a skills crisis, and our cities need those skills if they're going to be productive. And then maybe just a final policy takeaway is that a huge gap in our research knowledge is a localized firm-based survey. So we've got great information on households in South Africa, socioeconomic information through the census is very fine-grained. And even with surveys like the QLFS, Stats SA have made great strides to try and enable us to understand at a metro level what's going on. But actually, when it comes to the enterprises themselves, the businesses themselves, South Africa isn't actually running any kind of firm-based survey. And that's a problem, because we need to be far more in touch with what the needs of our enterprises are, and not just a national picture in terms of GDP, but what's the GDP of each of our local cities? Which sectors is that GDP coming from? At the moment, we're really doing a lot of estimation and guessing when it comes to some of those answers. And one last comment is there is a encouraging endeavor happening through the city support program through National Treasury to try and mine administrative tax data. And administrative sources of data would be a lot more cost effective, a lot cheaper, and perhaps more powerful than running these big surveys. Whether or not we're able to navigate all the confidentiality issues that's involved with that tax data is still a question mark, but we're fairly optimistic that we will be able to get some within city estimates of city economies through that tax data in the next year or two. So watch out for that. Okay. Thanks, Namfunda.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Justin. I think that's quite informative. Thankfully, we also have our counterpart and good friend of mine, Karen Harrison, on this call. So maybe later on, she can also just give us a bit of a synopsis pertaining to that particular tax data and the particular survey that's happening, because I think it's quite important that information and the right information and data is made available. Otherwise, how do we know? I think it's quite mind-boggling what you're saying, especially when you're talking about the gap regarding localized firm-based information, that the survey doesn't come out. So how do we know how to strengthen our firms, how to capacitate our firms, how to grow our urban economies if we don't know what we're dealing with to begin with? And I think that's a good launching point for us in terms of heading somewhere, in terms of building the case, I think, as Professor Turok had said, when wanting now to instigate these policy directives, and even as Tole had mentioned earlier on, from a macroeconomic scale, but also to empower the city to know where it is that they can also place economic infrastructure and they can support the development of these industries. So thank you very much for that, Justin. And please hang in there. I think we will still have some Q&A and discussion with some of our viewers. At this stage, no one has posted anything on our chat. But as it stands, I think we are going to then possibly ask our viewers to also please look at the poll. Thank you. Some individuals have been able to respond pertaining to the two particular questions. And I think also just these insights that we've been able to get from Dr. Justin Visagie are also quite important with regards to what is currently transpiring within our current domain. All right. And without much further ado, I think we are going to be well equipped, especially now having understood the macroeconomic landscape of what's currently transpiring, especially through the research that Dr. Justin Visagie did with Professor Ivan Turok, to also introduce now our second speaker, who is Dr. Megan Govander. And thank you very much for your participation, colleagues, especially with the polling as well. That's quite interesting to see your comments come through. And so I'd like to introduce Dr. Megan Govander as our second panelist. And Dr. Megan Govander is currently an operations evaluation specialist at the Development Bank of South Africa, where he primarily investigates the developmental impact of programs that are funded by the bank. And these pertain mainly to infrastructure projects in the energy, transport, water, sanitation, and IT sectors across all spheres of government in South Africa and the continent. However, prior to joining the DBSA, Dr. Govander worked as an economic consultant, undertaking research for government. And the projects that he's worked on also include technical support and write of the financial chapter of the City Support Program Guideline, for catalytic land development for the National Treasury, and then research and development of the state sector report for the Social Housing Sector Regulation Authority, known as SHRA, and then also the development of Consumer Affordability Index, the CAI, for the National Consumer Commission. Dr. Govander has also worked as a director within the Public Finance, Justice and Protection Services Division at the National Treasury. And Dr. Govander was awarded a doctorate in economics in 2012, and his doctoral thesis dealt with the use of conditional cash transfers as a means of addressing poverty in South Africa. So the paper that Dr. Govander wrote, and he co-authored with Dr. Pandi Pillay, and it's titled Integrating the Informal Sector into the Local Economy. So firstly, welcome, Dr. Govander. And if you can please, maybe just by means of introduction, just kindly tell our particular audience and viewers today about what your paper aimed to explore.
Good morning, Namfula, and good morning to the panelists and other invitees. Thank you for inviting me. Just one point, sometimes the volume went off. I'm not sure it's on my side or not. So if that happens, just give me a chat message, and I know I'm speaking to myself. Okay, with regard to the paper, I don't want to be too long because it is a lengthy paper. So ideally, I would like to give a taste so that maybe people would be inspired or would like to go and read the rest of the paper. The paper was about integrating informal economies, integrating informal sector into the local economy. I mean, a lot of research has been done about integrating informal economies due to the lack of skills, lack of finance, lack of knowledge. But we looked at it from a governance perspective because Professor Pillay is at the School of Governance, and I was lecturing at the School of Governance at the time. So this paper looks at it from a governance perspective. And firstly, obviously, we're going to talk what is governance. Governance has various meanings, has various definitions of governance, but basically how processes and systems can improve people's livelihoods and how they can actively engage and participate to make a better improvement in their lives. There are various schools of governance and of informality, but I will leave that to the paper. And basically, how can governance improve? Cities are embracing governance issues in terms of the IDPs engaging with citizens, people in the informal sector, giving them a voice, but it appears to be inadequate because there are various forums such as consultative forums, roundtables. There are even policies at the moment which cities can use. But on the other hand, cities are very often seeing the informal sector as a nuisance and annoyance, and they don't want to have anything to do with them. They want to sort of be these world-class cities where the informal sector is out of sight. But unfortunately, within the South African context, within the developing context, even within African context, informal sector is here to stay, and we cannot wish it away. So that's about basically what the paper was about. And then we talk about the policies that can be implemented. I saw a question earlier on the chat, and I think it was from Ashraf. It talks about, okay, a lot of these policies are in place. True, a lot of these policies are in place. But I think where they're lacking is in terms of empowerment of officials and bureaucrats to enforce these policies. I think they need to be made aware of them and how they can use them to integrate the informal sector into the modern cities. And I think there was another comment with regard to the, I forget what it was, if I look at the comment, okay, maybe slips my mind, but we can get to that. But basically, that's basically what our paper was about, how to bring in the informal sector into the economy, how we can integrate them, and through a governance perspective. I'll stop there, but I'm welcome to take questions.
That was very short and sweet, Dr. Megan. Thank you so much. And I guess maybe one of the takings or the undertakings that maybe our viewers are quite interested in is in the how. So what are some of the propositions that the paper says that cities can start undertaking in order for them to collaborate more with and integrate with the informal sector a bit more?
Okay, yes, thank you. I see even Ashraf said how. Yes, the how is important. I mean, the paper does discuss the various ways that has been done. There's a lot of examples in the paper of done in Africa, for example, in Uganda, where they have engagements with associations. But one must be very careful about the engagements and who the representatives actually have an interest. For example, you may have an NGO that represents the informal sector and may not be adequately representing their means, to the detriment of the informal sector, which has happened in Kampala, it has happened in other countries in Africa as well. That's the one way. We can also informal sectors can align with the besides the unions, which may not readily want to do that because they're there to represent formal workers, but some unions are willing to do this, such as the South African Federations Union. Then there is from the government sector, that is where the main obstacle is. And like I indicated, and like I said in the paper, the best way to do that is to empower the bureaucrats, okay? And secondly, within government, there are various departments within government that are involved in the informal sector within local government. And I think there should be someone who is a dedicated person or dedicated individual that coordinates efforts to engage with the informal sector. For example, in the IDP, before the city engages with people, look at the other sectors in this municipality in terms of the LED, local economic development, and how they can empower informal sector and how they can bring them in. Make sure they're at the beginning so that they have a voice, instead of when you have a development initiative and then it's a bit too late.
No, absolutely. I don't think I differ from your views, and especially the findings that you found with regards to your particular research. I think maybe something that could be of particular interest, having understood the various cases as well, Dr. Megan, that your paper research, and especially also with your background. Could you maybe assist in maybe explaining some of the governance issues that do prevent, for example, these type of incentives, interventions, or recommendations from actually being implemented? Where do you feel that the bottlenecks actually are?
Okay, there are various bottlenecks. Let's start from the official perspective. If you look at the Warwick Avenue junction, I mean, it was a negotiation for 15 years, and then the city just steamrolled it because of private sector involvement. I think somebody raised on also, do any of them attend the IDP meetings? Yes, they do. I mean, City of eThekwini is in the paper, we mentioned it. They do, but I don't think it is well announced or well articulated. So I think that is where, from a governance perspective, and I think maybe where also, before there is sort of sign off within the IDP, and if there's a specific element that's affecting the informal sector, there should be some sort of written acknowledgement within that to say, okay, we have consulted widely with this association. For example, our IDP LED is going to have an impact on the market in what we have consulted them, and this is what they have said. I think that's the only way, if you're having enough participation from a governance perspective, is it going to at least work and to hear the grievances. So from my view, that's the way to do it. I mean, I'm not too keen to have any more rules and regulation. I think there's quite a few already out there. I just think implementation is an issue.
All right. No, thank you, Megan. I think maybe just as a quick follow-up, we have a comment here from Ashraf, and he's just asking whether, as researchers, or do the researchers actually attend IDP meetings in the wards in which they reside? I mean, I guess maybe this is also to kind of gauge, in particular, to the decision-making process, the planning process that also prevails within these public engagement forums, and whether also the city and the practitioners are also able to meet the needs, in particular, of that particular constituency, and align, I presume, the plans. And I hope maybe, if I'm not articulating it too well, Ashraf, you'll just help there. But that was a question that was posed with regards to whether, as researchers, you also have been attending particular IDP meetings or the public engagement forums that do exist.
Okay, that's a very good question. No, I haven't, and I don't think that we are mandated to attend these meetings. I mean, as a researcher, I mean, I can attend it as a civil, as a citizen, and I think I'm there. I think what's more important, and I've been to some meetings with the National Planning Commission when we did a study in the townships and in rural areas. And I think it's important for them, the people, and especially the bureaucrats, to be accountable and to hear what is being said. I mean, when they can come back to the office and do the research and ask us to do research, or if they're going to do an IDP Imbizo talk, they can invite the researcher. But I don't think researchers should go on their own to advocate certain policies and certain issues on their own. But yes, as a citizen we can. But no, I don't think I haven't been as a researcher. No.
No, excellent. And I think thank you so much, firstly, for the very honest and contextual analysis that you're able to give. And I do also understand where the insight could also come in. I think as a supplementary statement, what is being mentioned in the chat here is that by attending, for example, these IDP sessions, then also pertaining to the recommendations that we can propel, pertaining to the research work, this could be more contextual. And what I'm really liking about that particular sentiment is that even pertaining to this element of research work that we are wanting to undertake as the African Cities Network, is to also land the work within the cities and within the localities. And I'm not sure whether capacity allows us to get, for example, to a ward level, but at least be able to also kind of mine the data that does emanate, especially from these kind of public consultations. And that's definitely something that we're looking forward to engaging in going forward. And so thank you very much. Thank you very much for those sentiments, Megan. Without further ado, I'd like to also just usher us into our third panelist member, fourth actually for the day, and that is Mr. Shahid Solomon, who also is a contributor to our paper series. And Mr. Shahid Solomon is a city planner and developmental strategist. He has a unique focus on transition management and the tectonic forces or transitions that are reshaping the world. He has designed long-term economic and infrastructure strategies for South Africa and its largest cities. These include Cape Town, Johannesburg, Tshwane, Ekurhuleni, eThekwini, and the Gauteng City region. And he is involved in fields as diverse as climate change adaptation, digital entrepreneurship, and technology platforms. Pardon me for that. So without further ado, I'd just like to welcome you, Shahid, onto today's session. Thank you so much for being available. And if maybe just as a means of introduction, you can just alert and inform our audience today about the particular paper that you undertook, what its title was, and what are the particular sentiments that the paper sought to extrapolate. Thank you.
Thank you, Nomfundo. Do I have 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 1 minute?
Let's say for your discussion, I mean, we'll obviously keep interacting, but maybe just as an introduction, let's give it about 3.5 minutes. Pertaining to what entailed.
You know, if you give a planner a platform, hey, can be all day. so yes, my paper, which was authored with Lucky Khwadi. Unfortunately, Lucky can't be with us, but Lucky is 31 years old, really dynamic technology entrepreneur, intensely involved in developing technology platforms in the townships, and myself also strongly involved in translating the awesome opportunities of the digital economy and the fourth industrial revolution to the realities of the township economy. And briefly speaking, as planners, as city planners and city strategists in South Africa, I think the day that we neglect the reality of the townships is the day that we completely neglect the reality of the cities. But at the same time, the day that we expect the townships to provide the solutions for themselves, then once again, we've entirely lost the plot. So how do you find the balance? And for me, the digital economy starts to really talk to the kinds of actions that we can take that don't just accelerate the township economy, but actually get it out there and make it competitive with national and even global economic dynamics. So this is very much happening. And whilst Lucky Khwadi's had incredible success together with his partner Edgar Lebello in developing e-commerce platforms in the townships with up to 20,000 members, delivering things as simple as bread and quotas in the township economy using low-cost Uber-type solutions. My work has really focused more on entrepreneurship development. So working with the CoLab for Digital Inclusion at UWC, we developed a training program to accelerate township entrepreneurs into the digital economy. And the paper was kind of inspired by two masterclasses that we ran in Philippi in Cape Town and in Mitchell's Plain, involving really grassroots township entrepreneurs. And we helped them to get an understanding of what digital business models could do for their businesses. And I was in partnership with Vuyo Rani, who I'm still in partnership with, of Cellular Technologies. And Cellular Technologies are really, I mean, they're absolutely township facing. They've got branches throughout the Western Cape and Eastern Cape. So we kind of had to work with two groups of township entrepreneurs to kind of understand, could they grasp basic understanding of the digital economy within a relatively short masterclass? Could they develop competitive business models? And would those business models be viable? To our astonishment, excitement, and surprise, we found that township entrepreneurs are indeed absolutely technology ready. They have smartphones. They understand how to use Facebook and WhatsApp. WhatsApp has changed the rules of the game. I mean, almost everybody now is on WhatsApp. Most township entrepreneurs are on WhatsApp. And it's a relatively simple next step to then say, how can you now use this amazing platform for digital marketing, digital business processes, even generating digital products? So it was really exciting. The process really demonstrated that the value proposition was real. There was tangible excitement in the work that we did. Even when our master classes ended, there was kind of anger to say like, hey, wait, I want to actually set this thing up, you know, because we kind of got so excited about the possibilities of the digital economy in the township. So kind of buoyed by that experience and buoyed by the deep research we did at the Digital CoLab, we are now actually looking at rolling up that project. We've brought together the partners that I've discussed, and we're working with Charlene Duncan at the UWC Enterprise Unit to see, can we upscale this to literally bring on board thousands of township entrepreneurs. So just briefly speaking, the recommendations are 4 levels. On the one hand, there's a manifest need to help township entrepreneurs understand the digital economy and digital business models and how they can actually transform their businesses. But on the other hand, there's also a very technical, practical need to teach township entrepreneurs how to use the phenomenal capabilities in their phones and how to practically undertake, you know, things like Facebook marketing. And Facebook now is the most powerful digital platform on the planet by far. It's the cheapest, has the highest impact. Why can't township entrepreneurs be absolutely killing it? Never mind with using WhatsApp and other kinds of platforms. So the first thing is just pure and simple, how to get the most out of my phone. So that's the training element. But the second element that's really critical is the platform. So we need to create a supportive, enabling platform that actually supports you, provides a bundle of support services on a platform. And these days we can actually design those platforms as no-cost platforms. So when the entrepreneur logs in onto our platform, they're actually not paying data. Of course, that has subsidy implications. But if you think of the leverage of that, of all the useless infrastructure that gets thrown into townships that never gets used, an enabling digital platform is just something that would deliver enormous benefits. The last issue, and this is a very pervasive issue, South Africa's data costs are the highest in the world. In fact, even in Africa, our data costs are 10 times that of Egypt. This is disgusting. It cannot be that we're allowing these few monopolies to charge such high costs for data. And what these monopolies are doing is, somebody like me will pay a competitive price for data because I'm getting a package. But if I buy, 1 gig here or 1 gig there, I'll be paying 10 times more than anywhere else in the world. So what we've got is a huge ripoff, and this is deeply inhibiting the township economy. And municipalities and governments need to look at this really seriously. We need to sit down with the big service providers and actually look at how we can just deliver globally competitive data prices, because until we actually achieve that reform, everything that we talk about, fourth industrial revolution, that is just going to be blah, blah, blah. The bottom line, people can't access platforms, they can't use their phones because they're paying ridiculous prices for data. And there are multiple technology solutions to this as well, and I won't lose time on that. Last point, so I don't want to exceed my 3.5 minutes. The other big thing is building a digital culture. Now, digital cultures, typically are the kinds of things that you see happening, in Observatory in Cape Town or Maboneng in Joburg, and they're kind of associated, with geeks and nerds and all kinds of people from, typically from relatively elite and advantaged backgrounds. We need to take active steps to build digital culture, to build startup culture in townships. And this does not mean building, incubators that stand empty for half the year and all kinds of silly things, as government always thinks that if they can throw some infrastructure at something, they'll solve the problem. It's not like that. Building culture, it's about hackathons, competitions, inter-school competitions. There's all sorts of really exciting, thrilling, fun ways through games, competitions, and in other ways that we can build exciting digital cultures in our townships. So that's it from me.
No, excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Shahid. I think you covered also most of the questions that I had for you, but I think what I particularly enjoyed about this particular offering that you gave in this paper is that you firstly premised it on a case study on the CoLab, but then on top of that, you were able to now extract quite an interesting phenomena that pertains to digitization within our township economy space. I think more than anything, it's quite important for us to actually be very cognizant and real about what type of economic infrastructure is going to be needed to spatially redress the apartheid spatial planning that still is in existence within the township economy. So another element of our work actually looked at how it is that we can utilize bylaws, for example, and regulations to also unlock township economic development. And you've come with a very interesting angle here by saying let's also utilize, for example, our ICT infrastructure as a means and a mechanism to also unlock particular value chains. So I like what you mentioned pertaining to, for example, reform. Because a lot of the time there is a lapse in terms of actually galvanizing or like just unleashing township economic development, because often at times we look at particular cases in isolation. We're not looking at the actual spatial form, mobility, the availability of infrastructure, like you're saying. And so it's very popcorn developments all over the place that might not necessarily receive or achieve the necessary impact that we're wanting to see. And also understanding, Shahid, that townships and how it is that their economies are strung are very different. So what could be transpiring, like you're saying, in the case that you had in Khayelitsha, could be fine and dandy for that particular area, but do you think that can also be climatized, for example, to a township like Nduzuma in KZN or Vosloorus in Gauteng? What would you say are the basics that need to be set in order for us to start activating this digital economy and utilizing it as a tools and a means to unlock township economic development?
Okay, thank you for that, Nomfundo. You know, I have the benefit of, and I think of all planners in South Africa who are honest, who've kind of been around for a couple of years, but they would say that they have the most powerful thing they have is all the mistakes that they've made. So one of my earliest mistakes in the 1990s was in Khayelitsha, you know, building sort of self-service roll-up door stalls. And, you know, in our minds, people were going to be selling things, making things. They were going to be making crafts and selling it to tourists, blah, blah, blah. Hell no. You know, they were leased to people. They used them for storing meat, and they built braais then they built braais, you know, for Chisanyamas right there on the road. And it's to this day the most delicious meat you can buy anywhere. And all of these cozy roll-up door stalls that we designed are used for like storing relish and meat. And they had absolutely no relationship with the actual economic activity that took place, which is selling freshly cooked meat to cars driving by. And it works, and it's providing a service, and it's dynamic, and it's vibrant, and it's happening. That for me is a classic example of how we start in the wrong place. So we impose an analysis of an economy, we propose an analysis of a township that comes from our experience and our perception of reality. Very rarely do we start with the entrepreneurs themselves. Very rarely do we seek to deeply interrogate and understand exactly what their business models are and why those business models are either working for them or not working for them. Very rarely do we do that. And very rarely do we then engage deeply with township entrepreneurs themselves to devise solutions which can make sense. So in the case of the example that I've given you, and it's a very random, arbitrary example, instead of having spent equivalent of 15 million rand building a vast infrastructure that to this day is not used, we could have spent a quarter of that money and built a lay-by so that passing traffic could actually stop, and they could buy, you know, they could buy the meat and do that, and do so safely without interrupting the traffic. So had we actually really done a thorough needs analysis and worked with the customer, as it were, then we would have produced solutions which generate far more in economic revenue, jobs, and everything else we want to achieve. But the beauty of the digital economy is that it is inherently needs-based. It's inherently customer-driven. The very principles of digital business models are customer engagement. And it is an inherently, instantly competitive business model and platform. So whether, you know, in some of the workshops, you know, one of the most interesting township businesses is distribution of cleaning products. You know, an entrepreneur will buy a whole lot of cleaning products at a very low price, you know, from Macro or one of the other big retailers, and then sell relatively low-cost cleaning products. Now, once that entrepreneur understood that a digital platform could reach, you know, extensively within their area through selective targeting using Facebook and other platforms and using delivery systems, I mean, wow, the business could double, quadruple, triple in size. That's just one example. And there are multiple other examples in everything that you can think about. Because the digital economy is inherently customer driven and it's inherently needs based. So it requires a totally different mindset and the kind of enabling things that government can do and must do is to provide low cost, ubiquitous broadband access. You know, for most of the people who are probably watching this seminar weren't profoundly affected professionally by COVID-19 because you had broadband at home, you could continue to order things, buy things, you had information, you could carry on doing your job. Just think about the person that's trapped in the township, can't afford the data, and now there's a COVID-19 lockdown. It is complete, total social and economic isolation. So the digital divide in the context of COVID-19 was absolutely drastic, for at least 60% of our population. This can't be. We can't go on and call ourselves a developmental state if we're expecting the poorest of the poor, to pay 10 times what other people are paying in other countries for data, and to not have free broadband access for everybody. If we can provide houses at 100,000 Rand that eventually get resold, the relative cost of providing every single household in South Africa with low cost broadband access is very low. The impact, the economic impact of that on the total economy will be really, really high. Some of the economic impact analysis have indicated anything from a 2%, to an 8% increase in GDP just by doing that. So I think that as a country, we just need to get woke, stop talking about the fourth industrial revolution. Stop pretending this and pretending that. Get real. Why aren't people able to use these platforms? What do they need to get done? Let's get on with it. I'm a bit passionate.
I love that. I absolutely love that, Shahid. Absolutely love it. I actually adore your passion as well. I think it's quite rare that you can genuinely get the elements of a person who's gotten their hands dirty within the township economic space, not just as a practitioner, but as a person who's also developing, for example, the young talent within that area and trying to also understand the dynamics. I mean, this really has the potential of sending or of taking our businesses, our small enterprises on a totally different trajectory, and also unlocking other value chains. And I think it's quite integral and quite important. I think the other person who's in obvious agreement is Naam. I think it's Naam silent G. I hope it's a silent G. Naam Pillay, who's also saying that I agree with Shahid regarding starting with township entrepreneurs first and getting the opinions on issues they are foremost familiar with. So thank you very much for those sentiments. And I think maybe just as we are getting this discussion also going, and obviously in the interest of time, we'd also just like our viewers and our audience to also still participate, especially with regards to what your thinking is. I mean, it's very easy for us to always want other individuals to kind of give us the solutions, but often at times we might also have particular ideas and inferences in terms of how it is that we can unlock certain elements pertaining to our urban economies. And so on that note, I'd like us to also go into our Mentimeter platform just one last time. You remember that the address, if that can please also just be put onto our chat, maybe just in the interest of some participants who might have only joined us now, for us to go to www.menti.com, or we can scroll actually up on the chat to see that link. And then if you can please just answer this particular, and if you actually if you hadn't closed, then the next question should actually come right up. And what we are wanting to solicit, especially from our audience today, who are our stakeholders, who are our partners, who are individuals with various interest groups and expertise. Some are leading development agencies, some are lead practitioners in national departments, some are researchers, some are just civil society civilians, some are even entrepreneurs who are interested in terms of how it is that we can propose to strengthen our economies. And I think leading especially from the sentiments that were shared by Shahid just early on, to say that often at times we are not engaging with the actual entrepreneurs to understand their business models. Maybe if our colleagues here on the call today can possibly also propose their own ideas with regards to what you would propose cities do in order for them to strengthen their urban economies, and possibly how. So I'll just give a few seconds for all of us to populate that. And also welcome our panelists to please also propose in terms of certain interventions and ideas in terms of how it is that cities can strengthen their urban economies, bearing in mind our discussion, bearing in mind our particular vocations, our particular elements of thought and scholarship. What is it that we would instigate for our cities to do in order for them to strengthen our urban economies? And then we'll start showcasing our responses in just a few. So excellent. We have some very great responses so far. So what is proposed is that we get rid of government red tape, that we listen to the people on the ground. Someone said we need to stop listening to researchers and consultants and academics who don't know their recommendations mean in the day-to-day of governance and disabling macroeconomy. But unfortunately, that doesn't say what then should we do. So maybe if we can get a further response in terms of how cities, what do we propose for cities to do to strengthen their economies? All right. So if we're not listening to researchers and consultants and academics, who then do cities listen to? Sean, if you can just scroll up again, please. Okay, a shift in mindset from regulate to develop. Get real about the context of the majority, all right? Gain autonomy over their economic jurisdictions and start partnering and fostering regional development, because competing with each other is not enough. Digitalization, we do an in-depth analysis of informal economies, understand how it works, and look at how it can be integrated within the main economy. Incubation and supportive sectors with comparative and competitive advantage. Import substitution for goods that can be locally farmed, manufactured, and understand this is a process, and local procurement by public sector as a minimum. We integrate informal and formal economies, interesting, and definitely something that needs further unpacking in terms of how. Be strict on implementing some of the policies that have been put in place. Let it not fizzle out like it usually happens. Absolutely. Have conversations with the people in the area to address their needs, not what they think they need. This is an important one as well. Prevent corruption so that resources end up where they are supposed to be. Absolutely. And then focus on spatial development in a new way, promoting jobs and livelihoods, especially pertaining to the informal sector. And I think those are definitely recommendations and elements that also, as the South African Cities Network, and considering also the various partner organizations that are also part and parcel of this particular core, we will want to further uptake, not just in an element of knowledge generation, but also in the element of knowledge dissemination. And I think that's quite integral and quite important, because it's quite integral for us to have the right kind of inferences and data and information that can be able to impact on the right kind of decision making. Because fundamentally, all these policies, all these legislations, all these interventions fundamentally land themselves with the people and the constituencies that we serve, and obviously impact on our urban economies. So thank you so much to everybody who has been able to participate, at least within our Mentimeter survey. I think it's quite important, and these are the kind of inferences and sentiments that we definitely have to look at going forward in terms of unpacking what that means. And there was an important note that even Sithole mentioned before he had to depart. And what he mentioned was that what is missing is actually the practical partnering framework. And this could also possibly be a tool between which government, which is the lead in terms of facilitating, for example, delivery and conducive environments for urban economies and businesses to be able to locate themselves and thrive, would be able to constitute with urban development players such as our civil society, our business, municipalities, and academia, I would say. And so perhaps what we need in order for us to kind of crack this particular element in terms of how it is that we can foster collaboration is probably the development of this practical partnering framework or tool where all these elements of society, so our Q4 actors, our government, our academia, our business and civil society, that we are seen as partnering in terms of how it is that we deliver and collaborating instead of the one being hosted as the lead implementer and the lead instigator in terms of how this works. And I wonder if this particular practical partnering framework or tool would actually land itself from a macroeconomic perspective or a local economic perspective and what the implications of that would mean. But fundamentally, we would want to be able to hasten the pace of service delivery and possibly also make the required impact. And so with those kind of sentiments, I just want to also quickly check the chat for any further developments before we actually end our conversation that does pertain to most of the great insights and the discourse that was shared today. I agree with Lindy when she's also saying, let's get woke. This was particularly Shahid's sentiments and comments. She says that this is Wendy Lambert, she says that she just loves it, and very relevant points on how we think we know what township entrepreneurs need without engaging with them first and asking them what they need. She's always flabbergasted by that. And then also I like the recommendation, I think, from Ashraf Adam, who says that could SACN also host a seminar on how terms such as spatial transformation, township economic development, and generalized comments perpetuate apartheid. And I think also just unpacking the particular discourse and terminology and frames could really be an interesting conversation, considering the type of terrain and individuals that we're wanting to reach, that we're wanting to impact, and possibly also just foster that, because I think the jargon isn't just used by us, but also finds itself within the academic space. It finds itself within civil society. It finds itself within government. So to actually unpack those elements and to ensure that our constituencies understand, the civilians that we are serving understand these particular terminologies and what is meant by that. And how it is, I guess, in this particular sentiment could possibly be perpetuating apartheid would be interesting. So that's definitely something that we can possibly look at. And then thank you also, Karen, I think above also mentioned and unpacked in particular the City Support Program Specialized Economic Data Project. And this was touched on briefly through our conversation with Dr. Justin Fasaki. And she just explained that the project is extracting and analyzing firm level and employment data within the National Treasury Secure Data Center to make the information available to cities in a table and map series. So it will have a spatial representation element to it. And the information is extracted to be presented in a table and map series. So info will be disaggregated by available 4 or 5 SIC codes, employment, those being employment, income, wage band, sector turnover, number and size of company, at least at census or main place level. And the intention is to make the information available to cities on an annual basis. And as Justin mentioned, with the key challenge is that the project deals with anonymized tax data, which makes confidentiality quite an issue. So thank you so much for sharing that, Karen. I really hope that this really important element of data that can obviously impact on a city level decision making and support, and knowing where to also input the right kind of economic infrastructure to support these kind of businesses and enterprises will be utilized, especially to find itself within the SDBIPs and the IDPs of our cities. And then colleagues, just maybe as I'm summing up some of the sentiments within our chat, if you can please also just fill out, there's an evaluation and feedback form that will also just enable us to improve on our engagements going forward. So Sadhna, if you can please just repost that particular information and the link right at the end, thank you, because I think it might have just been lost with some of the sentiments that were shared. So just as we are summing up our discussion today, if that can be the case. And then, yeah, Karen is it Karen Ben Zeev is also just wanting to find out where it is that we can access these particular papers. And that obviously was going to be the cherry on top of the cake. And so without much further ado, I wanted to officially also launch our Urban Economies paper series, which is being showcased on our screens right now. We have a multitude of other authors who also were able to contribute. And so we have other elements that also speak towards our urban space economy that further go into the informal economy and other paper contributions from various other entities and individuals. So in order for you to please access the copy, we've got a link. Sean, if maybe you can please just repost the link at the bottom of our chat. And that is will give you direct access to be able to download this particular paper. And I wanted to actually close off by firstly just giving our panelists, so I want to open up for some last closing comments to Dr. Justin Fasaki, maybe first of all, pertaining to some of your thoughts and maybe just summing thoughts pertaining to today's conversation.
Hi, Nomfundo. Just thanks for having me, and it's been a productive discussion. And it's good to see the suggestions about what we should do, emphasizing the need for sort of locally based partnerships, locally based information. And I firmly believe that we need to, as South Africans, shift our mindsets that, you know, it's not national government who's going to provide the solutions, but it's us coming together at the local level and figuring out what needs to be done. And obviously that looks very different in an informal settlement or in a township economy or in a formal business district, but at all these different local scales, we need our economies to thrive. So thanks for inviting me to this discussion.
Great, and obviously our thanks and appreciation for the immense amounts of work that you've done and the amazing insight that you've given us. Thank you, Justin. And then Dr. Megan Govander, do you have any closing remarks on your side as well pertaining to today's engagement and maybe any other facilitating thoughts?
Yes, no, thank you once again. Yes, I thought the engagement was quite fruitful, especially the chats. I think the comments, and I like the ones, although it may affect our paper the most in terms of it's more generalized and to be more contextualized if we were on the ground. And I think that as researchers, and I mean, I have done a lot of work on the ground with the communities, and I think that also feeds into the paper. I didn't realize how much time I had. I think I would have covered more, but I asked the people to read the paper, and I think it'll be more well documented, discussed, and I think the comments coming from the other people and the panelists were quite positive, and yes, and I think we'll take that in future research. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Megan. It's always a pleasure also working with you, and I really hope, especially with your current new endeavors at the DBSA, that will be lots more insights that we can also gather from you and the kind of work and responsibility areas that you have. Thank you so much. And then also, maybe lastly, also from Mr. Shahid Solomon, our city planner extraordinaire. Mr. Shahid, if you can please also just give us your thoughts.
Sure, I really have no choice but to take exception to the comment that South Africa has got much to share with other African countries. If we honestly reflect on what we've achieved in the 25 years of our democracy, it is an appalling track record. As a profession, we can be ashamed of ourselves. We don't see any beautiful restructurings of cities that are truly inclusive. We see a Mooikloof, we see a Century City. The private sector is continuing because of our lack of imagination, because of our failure to put money behind our ambitions, because of our laziness to engage in the institutional frameworks that transform our cities. We're finding that conditions in almost all of our townships are significantly worse than they were 25 years ago. Whether it's Durban, where I'm based now, whether it's Ekurhuleni, whether it's Cape Town, parts of Cape Town are not significantly worse. They're much worse after 25 years of democracy. So, and I think this is behind what all of the speakers have said today. We are in serious trouble as a profession and as a country. And I think the time has come for us to start to really be honest and reflect. What were we doing? And most importantly, why did we fail? You know, this is my research at the moment. What Africa needs to know more than anything else is why we failed, not why we succeeded, because we failed. We failed at every conceivable level, rural, urban, township, suburban. It's just a mess, much worse than it was. So my kind of message really from all of this is, let's get woke. Let's start to really, really analyze where we are, how we got to where we are, what it was that we didn't do, what it was that we did do, because we have a young generation of South Africans now, and they're expecting a lot of us. And I'm sorry, I mustn't just go on and on, but truly, what about starting to have real urban visions again? What about starting to dream cities, South African cities that truly are regenerative, that truly are transformative? Why have we stopped dreaming? And how can we start to engage with the young minds, the energies that are emerging, exciting energies all over our country, to start this debate again? Let's start again. Let's learn from what we've done, and let's rethink the future. That's it from me.
Absolutely. Are you not running for election, Shahid? Absolutely, absolutely. And I think both Wendy Lambert and Michael van der Meulen also are in complete agreement with your sentiments. And this really gives us food for thought for things to also just travail or go beyond, rather. Us leaving things from just a theoretical perspective, but to say, how is it that we can unstitch, you know, apartheid spatial planning? How is it that we can unstitch and redress how it is that our most deprived areas are going to continue to be even worse off? And surprisingly, this is post-apartheid. Yeah, I mean, it's really, really scary. So thank you very much to everybody. My sincere appreciation to everybody who logged in today, and my sincere appreciation in particular, and thanks and gratitude to all our panelists. This is Professor Ivan Turox, Tolembanga. Thank you, Dr. Megan Govander. Thank you, Dr. Justin Fisaki, and thank you, future President Shahid Solomon as well, for having interacted today. And my utmost thanks as well to everybody who tuned in. Thank you so much for having come today. And please do access our website so that you are able to look at the Urban Economies paper series. Please, a huge disclaimer, obviously this paper series was summated post-COVID. So a lot of the sentiments and research was also based on that particular information and data that we had gotten at that stage. But it's obviously one of the interesting factors and perspectives that we'd also like to look into in the future, having also seen the recent pronouncements, for example, the economic revitalization plan and the various other kinds of interventions and initiatives to also track what is transpiring within the particular urban economies and the sectors that we have instigated research in. And so without much further ado, I'd just like to thank you and send our utmost appreciation for having joined our call today. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.